needs no introduction any longer. If you are not familiar, we can just Google him. Maybe a quick one. He has published 13 books so far, more on it, inshallah. And he is an expert on Hamka. He has published a very comprehensive book on Hamka, so I advise you all to check that out, inshallah. And maybe a quick summary of what we covered in session 1, inshallah, for those who are here and those online. Alhamdulillah, we opened with Hamka's, a bit of Hamka's biography. Prof touched on his father and his grandfather and their influence on him, how he read the books of Aristotle in Arabic, and he's also very acquainted with the intellectual tradition of Minangkabau, and he's very well versed with the non-Asian philosophies as well. And then we went a bit into his perspective on the interactions between different sects, different sectarian ideologies, and what was his orientation, his intellectual orientation. And after that we went a bit into psychology. So that one, I mean, if you are watching online, you might think it was a bit random, but the nature of Hamka's work, as Prof mentioned, is that he will engage any Western intellectual, Eastern intellectual that he feels like he needs to, in order to give the Islamic interpretation and provide a synergetic perspective as well. So that was just a quick summary of chapter 1, and we will move straight to chapter 2, Prof. You want to open chapter 2?
Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Jadi ini dah terbiasa cakap bahasa Melayu kat Malaysia ni. I just came back from KL. Okay, so we will continue from last week. So what we did last week was to discuss how Hamka placed a lot of importance on akal. And as I said last week, this is quite interesting because most Muslim thinkers in this time do not want to talk about the importance of akal because they felt that the people of akal are usually the secularists. The people of akal are usually people who were very much influenced by Western thoughts. But Hamka placed the importance of akal because he wants to show, even to the people who are Western oriented, that Islam is a religion of akal. So we will start chapter 2 with his very powerful point where he says, agama Islam amat menghormati akal kerana tidak akan tercapai ilmu kalau tidak ada akal. Sebab itu Islam adalah agama ilmu dan akal. If you are reading the book, go to that part in chapter 2. The heading is ilmu dan akal, the first few lines of ilmu and akal. So this is very, very important because he is basically making the point to us that one cannot be a good Muslim if one does not apply and exercise one's reason. Islam is a religion of the intellect. Come to think of it, I mean, come on. When we decide to follow Islam, many of us are also born into a Muslim family. But if someone is a non-Muslim and decide to become Muslim, the first thing that the person must have before the person can accept Islam is knowledge. Islam is a religion of knowledge. People come into Islam, the first thing they need to know is how to pray. You must study how to pray. The first thing you need to know, actually, is to recite the kalimah syahadah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah. So even if you are converted to Islam, you have to know a little bit of the Arabic language. You can even recite it actually without using the Arabic, but it is highly encouraged to say it in Arabic. But the point is that by entering into Islam, you are already encouraged to use your reason, to use your intellect. When you want to pray, you have to know the direction of the Kaaba. And the direction of the Kaaba, knowing the direction of the Kaaba necessitates you to know how to use the compass. There you have another knowledge, the knowledge of the Qibla, but the knowledge of using a compass. But knowing how to find the Kaaba also tells you about the map of the world. And this is what Hamka is trying to tell us. Islam, unlike many other religions all over the world, emphasizes first on the importance of ilmu and akal. And that's why there is an Arabic saying, al-ilmu qabla amal. The ilmu must come before action. You cannot pray without ilmu. You pray only when you have learned how to pray. So I want to start with that first because it is a high note that he's trying to make, and he's trying to emphasize the point that one who decides to be a Muslim cannot say that the person does not want to learn. It is almost obligatory. Rasulullah SAW says that talab al-ilm faridatun ala kulli muslim. That the search of ilmu is actually a fardu. Right? Some ulama say it's a fardu ain for every single Muslim. So nowadays, we hear a lot about many places where they talk about lifelong learning. 1,500 years ago, Islam has already emphasized that a Muslim must practice lifelong learning and exercise his or her intellect throughout his or her life. So I want to start with that.
Thank you so much, Prof. Yeah, I think that last point that you mentioned, there was this funny meme online where this modern Muslims, they compare the wellness practices of the current day with everything from the Sunnah. So the current day has meditation, and Islam has prayer, and then the current day has all the different practices, and then Islam 1,400 years ago.
Well, I won't fault them. It's a very good point that you mentioned there. There are a lot of parallels with all these movements now, mindfulness, meditation with Islam. But I think we need to go a little bit further because in Islam, it is not only about exercising your mind, but it is about also preserving and nurturing the mind. That's why, if you think about it, for those people who are listening in and who are much older than me, in the past, in societies, especially for those who have lived in kampongs, I come from Yunus Crescent, the people of Geylang Belt, basically. You seldom hear old people getting dementia. If you look at the statistics of dementia, at least in Singapore, and for those listening in Malaysia and Indonesia, people are getting dementia right now at the age of 35 years old. What is happening actually? The problem is actually with the intellect. Of course, if you go through medical science, there are so many reasons for the coming of dementia, but the big problem now is actually the exercise of the mind. And Islam already emphasizes this many thousand years ago, and we need to restore and reclaim this practice of exercising the mind as much as possible until we grow old. This is a crisis actually in our community, and Hamka is talking about it, that kita dah menjadi masyarakat yang sukakan kejahilan. We have become a society that love to be ignorant. Think about it. Nowadays, when people retire, what do they say they want to do?
Holiday.
Cakap bila dia dah retire, everything let go, don't want to do anything, stay at home, watch Netflix, and that's it. And all of these are actually the cause of the dementia crisis that we have now. And Hamka is trying to say we should try to avoid it by always looking at the mind. And now medical science is actually saying it, the mind is a muscle. If you don't exercise the muscle becomes weak, the mind becomes weaker, and that leads to other problems.
I think I want to add on a bit, Prof. I think from a more traditional perspective, right? I was speaking to a few Safis, and they mentioned that this lack of intellectual engagement starts from young. The traditional engagement with rational laws, which is a fundamental part of Aqidah, is lost. Even in some center, they were lamenting amongst the youth. In traditional Islam, there's always from the age of 6, when they become baligh, straight away they learn Aqidah. And then within our Aqidah of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, I think we will go into this a bit later on when Hamka talks about Aqidah. It goes a bit into about the discussion on Yaqeen. In the Aqidah of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the rational laws are quite intellectually stimulating. And the lack of this educational program on Aqidah, now you have the live program, etc. But that is more of a place where people go to be connected with asatiza, but the activities that they do are not as intellectually rigorous as what the tradition already has prepared for us. So maybe that's just a small critique from modern asatiza. Although there will definitely be constraints that the cause of this, but just that was a reflection of mine when I was reading this, because I myself experienced the lack of intellectual rigor. But yeah, so from here, I wanted to go to the next few pages.
I just want to add to that. Again, Hamka talks about this in his other book, and maybe later on, when you put it out as a social media, he has a very interesting book called Ayahku, where he actually pays tribute to his father, right? And this is linked to Falsafah Hidup, because as mentioned last week, he began Falsafah Hidup talking about his father. He calls his father in Falsafah Hidup a dictator, right? Then later on, when he thinks about his father in Ayahku, he realized that his father was a dictator for a good reason. So when he wrote Ayahku, to link back to what you said about a life program and all of these other educational programs, he realized that his father, from the very beginning, since he was small, had always been intellectualizing him. That means his father was the first avenue by which he learned knowledge. And we know this from the Quran also. In Surah Luqman, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا لُقْمَانَ الْحِكْمَةَ أَنِ اشْكُرْ لِلَّهِ وَمَنْ يَشْكُرْ فَإِنَّمَا يَشْكُرُ لِنَفْسِهِ. And the ayat goes where Luqman says to his son, Ya bunayya la tushrik billah inna shirka la dhulmun alim. Luqman was teaching his children. And if you look at the ayat of the Quran, and even if you then reflect with what Hamka's father had done to him, the father was the source of knowledge and wisdom. And again, this is the other issue that we have in our community. We are talking about programs in masjid and in classes and all. Kids go to religious classes, learn Islam, and go back home with zero stimulus. So imagine, you spend 2 hours learning about Islam, right? You come back home, you see no Islam. You come back home, you see the opposite of Islam, actually. You come back home, your father, your mother do not talk to you about Islam. And this is why when we talk about Hamka's point about the akal cannot develop until and unless the first people whom the akal had been so-called brought down to did something to that akal. Who are the first people? The first people are parents. You are born from your mother and your father. And you look at all the great ulamas in the past, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Bukhari, they were orphans. Who did they learn from? Their mothers. And then if you look at a lot of other ulama in the past, many names you can think of, Hamka is only one of them. Many of them says that they learned the Quran from their father. So if there's one thing I want to pass across today for this session, is that fathers who are listening, you must be the person who are teaching your children Islam and teaching your children how to think. How to think rationally, but also how to think through Islam. Whether they accept it or not later in life is another issue. But one thing that I hope the community will relieve, which happened when I was younger, is that kita nak kena ada mengaji Al-Quran di rumah. Even if it's a few minutes every day, and we do it, and also we discuss it a bit here and there. Of course, we don't want to do tafsir on our own at home with our children.
We can read Hamka's tafsir.
Exactly, we can read Hamka's tafsir. It will take a long time to finish.
In our traditional scholars, what Prof Kai just mentioned, they call it the madrasah Abawi, the madrasah of the fathers. That's the first madrasah. And actually, I think I will wrap up this small critique that we're doing here. But Hamka himself goes into a critique, interestingly, in just the next 2 pages. He says here he's critiquing the Mubalik, the scholars who go up onto the mimbar. But at that time, we know that he is trying to push for a higher level of scholarship. So here he critiques, he says, Mubalik yang naik mimbar menyeru orang banyak dan memperingatkan hendaklah mereka datang ke dunia ini sebagai orang yang berdagang atau sebagai orang yang singgah. Jangan dipandang dunia itu tempat yang akan dihuni selama-lamanya. Then he continues, yang diterangkannya itu ialah ilmu yang dihafalnya daripada hadis. Kelak setelah dia turun dari mimbar itu, ditanya orang apakah maksud hidup dan apa erti hidup. Dia tidak dapat memberikan jawab yang memuaskan sebab perhatiannya tidak sampai ke sana. Walaupun isi pidatonya tadi itulah yang mesti dijawabkannya. And then he continues. So nowadays I always see videos of people slightly younger than me lamenting their religious upbringing and etc. Although I must balance the point and say that the Asatiza of today are definitely much more engaged with the people and they know what the youth want to hear and the approach that they should have, but just extending that.
Yeah, and I think Hamka in the same chapter is very harsh towards the ulama of his time. In page 49 for my book, I think for yours it should be the next page. In the paragraph it says, Ali bin Abi Talib berkata, segala keranjang penuh lantaran diisi, cuma keranjang ilmu yang apabila meminta tambah. Right? So then goes on to say, yang dibenci oleh syarak ialah ulama canggung. So it's a very powerful term. I mean, if you want to translate it, it's like the emasculated ulama, right? Yang setengah matang. And he says that the ulama is actually half matured. Sebagai seorang yang bukan pakar ubatan, mencuba mencampur obat, disangkanya akan menjadi obat, mungkin menjadi racun. Ulama begini dipanggil ulama su', yang menghalalkan yang haram dan mengharamkan yang halal. So he criticized not only the common people who are not willing to exercise their reason, he also criticizes the ulama who exercise their reason in an evil way. So it's actually two sides of the coin, right? You either don't use your reason or you use your reason wrongly, and that can happen too. And that always happens to the people of knowledge. The challenge of the people of knowledge is that when they have received a lot of knowledge and memorize things and understand things, they are always vulnerable to the deceptions of the devil. And what is the deception of the devil? The deception of the devil is that they feel that they know better than other people. So kibir and riya, that's number one. Number two is they want to cheat the people through the knowledge that they have. So Hamka criticizes them, that inilah ulama-ulama yang menggunakan ilmunya untuk menunggak agama dan mendapat pendapatan yang tinggi. So people who actually use knowledge in order to make a lot of money from that knowledge, but in the end teach the public things that are actually not truthful and that can actually improve their lives.
I actually want to share a bit about this other problem I was discussing with my wife. Currently there's this epidemic of scholars who are using the problem of husband and wife to gain views. They always share the most myopic view that they can have about what a husband and wife is supposed to look like, but then they don't take into consideration the implications for the men who are watching this, who have no background knowledge in Islam and who will not use their akal. Going back to what their wife needs in the current moment versus what they watch, and then this applies straight away without so here the place of the akal comes back. So it's kind of a full circle where this is the relationship between the scholar and knowing the people of his time. So I guess this is what Hamka was trying to address as well. Yeah. So maybe we can just take a breath and see what page we want to go to next.
Yeah. So the thing that I want to extend also from what you said just now. Now the problem that we have now is that we are fed with half or not even half of everything that we want to do. So you have half truths everywhere. You watch a video, the video goes on for 30 seconds to 1 minute, and you think that is the absolute truth. You watch a podcast or you listen to any of these influencers' lectures, and They give you, like you said just now, very well, a myopic view of a certain thing because they want to push forward a certain agenda, and you are affected by it. And you end up living your lives in that manner. So this is the issue of humankind right now. We are actually living in a life of half-truths. Some people say it's post-truth. There's no truth that you can actually believe in anymore. And this is where we need to ground ourselves back. Right? There is an interesting book that is written by, the book is basically entitled The Fall of Expertise, right? Where the man, the author, I forgot his name now, Dretzner, one of them, will search for it later on. He was talking about the problem of our age where expertise are no longer appreciated. What people value more are people who have sound bites, are people who are able to deliver something in a very attractive way, even if that thing is not actually giving you the kind of information that you need. So we have that crisis. And that's why Hamka, even in his time, realizes this. And he says that the akal, not only that, akal is important, akal itu penting, but he says that akal that is powerful and that is properly nurtured is an akal that has a proper direction. So what is actually the direction of akal? This is the question that we need to ask. Apakah tujuan akal? And he says here, in the part on tujuan akal, the page after that, he says, tujuan akal yang paling mulia, tujuan akal yang sejati, tujuan perjuangan kita di dalam hidup ini adalah makrifat Allah, kenal pada Tuhan, mengerjakan perintahnya dengan taat, menahan diri daripada memaksiatinya, dan he goes on and on. So what is actually the purpose of akal that we need to be aware of and concerned with, so much so that we will not fall into half-truths, right? It is that when we seek knowledge, when we think about issues, we are thinking about it in order to know Allah better. Now, to know Allah better requires one, I mean, you cannot say just simply by sitting down and reflecting after half an hour, now I know Allah. His point here is that one needs a whole life of learning in order to know the essence and the purposes that Allah has put in for you to live in this world and to recognize Him. And he goes on to say that there are many ways or many tingkatan, many levels to know Allah. And this is the beautiful part, I think, of this chapter, of this part of the chapter where he says, makrifat pada Allah, that means to know Allah, terbagi kepada 3 bahagian. Right? There's 3 levels of knowing Allah. Right? The first level, he says, is the level of the waliullah and the shuhada. These are the people, according to him, who know Allah in the most deepest way possible. Right? Why he says that waliullah and the shuhada, the people who fight in the cause of Allah, know Allah the best? Because they understand that the whole purpose of learning, of living, of striving, of working, of taking care of your children, of serving the community, everything that we do, inna salati wa nusuki wa mahyaya wa mamati lillahi rabbil alamin. Everything that we do is supposed to be directed only towards understanding what Allah has created us to do. So that is the highest level. And that's why if you have discerned Allah's wisdom in creating you, you become at the level of the waliullah and the shuhada. Because the shuhada, they understand they have to go out and fight for the cause of good because Allah has designed them for that purpose. And many people do not realize this. The majority of people do not know why they are created for. And this is the tragedy of a lot of people all over the world. And Hamka says this in another writing, I think it's not in Falsafah Hidup, but it's another book. He says that if you live like a normal person out there, you will die like a number. Right? Kamu akan seperti orang-orang saja, biasa-biasa saja yang akan mati. But if you understand the purpose of your life, you are going to leave behind legacies. Be it a legacy of knowledge, the legacy of good deeds and so forth and so forth. I go a little bit deeper for this. Right? And then he said the second ma'rifat, and again when you use ma'rifat, it sounds very sophistic. And he says that ma'rifat yang kedua ialah pertenahan, ialah ia didapati dengan jalan dhan yang ditafsir oleh ahli lughah dengan yakin meskipun belum sampai keyakinan yang sejati. So he says that the second level of ma'rifat, of understanding Allah and what Allah wants to do for a human being, is one who is aware that that person has doubt, right? But the person is still striving to understand things better. So these are the common people like us. Sometimes we don't know, so we ask in order to be sure. And this is something that we need to practice in our lives. That we need to have what we call as the art and habit of questioning. Malu bertanya, sesat jalan. Sebab banyak orang sesat. Sebab dia tak tahu apa dia buat. Dia tak tahu apa dia buat. Dia tanya ChatGPT. Kalau dia tanya Syekh Google. And this is the problem of our time, right? That we are actually filled with a lot of doubt. Hamka is saying the second level of ma'rifat. But we're not asking the proper people, the experts that can actually answer our question. And the last part of ma'rifat, it says ma'rifat yang ketiga, yang paling rendah, yang imannya kepada Allah hanyalah lantaran hayal dan ikut-ikutan kepada orang banyak, taklid atau keturunan sahaja. Which means that the lowest type of ma'rifat, he says, is the ma'rifat of the person. If the second one, he has zon, he has doubt, and he asks, the third one says, I will just follow. And this is the majority of people. They just follow whatever people do, they follow the trends, they follow what people say. Ustaz cakap salah pun dia ikut, professor cakap salah pun dia ikut. And we have a lot of people like this who are easily cheated by con men. So a lot of the scams that you see out there, for those listening in, it has a lot to do with people who do not want to question things. And even smart people get scammed. Because somebody is calling you and says, are you interested in this scheme? Instead of asking somebody else, hey, have you heard this scheme before? Or check with the authorities whether this is a scam or not, they now assume that they know better. And once you think that you know better, then this is where you fall prey to a lot of people who will cheat you. And Hamka says that orang yang begini masih dekat kepada syirik. And that's why a lot of people, they do things that are contravening Islam, yang terkeluar daripada Islam, sebab dia tak banyak bertanya. Jadi jangan takut untuk bertanya.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you for going through that. So, maybe for me, just to connect what Prof has said to practical step that we can take. So basically here in this part on tujuan akal, Hamka is going into exposition of Akidah. He's telling us the different levels of yakin. So to tie it to the traditional learning that we will learn, if we go and study Akidah under a teacher, we know that there are 4 levels of belief. So the highest one is yakin, which is obligatory for every Muslim. The second one is dhan. So dhan, how we learn it is between 50% certainty and 100% certainty. So that's why we have husnul dhan. That is having a good pushing your trust in the person to a higher level to have a good opinion of him. And then you have shak. So shak is 50%. So and in Malay we have this word also, 50%. I shak them, I suspicious. And then the last one is waham. So waham is the one that Prof mentioned just now, is closest to syirik. It is less than 50%. And so as a Muslim, how do we get to a 100% certainty? Now this is where Prof, you can read here. This is where students who go into university find a problem, because in the university we are taught to doubt everything, which is good because you have to question, and then that is where the Western University understands that a more scientific spirit will emerge. But in Islam, this is where your traditional foundation must be there, because in Islam there is no level of belief below 100% certainty. And how you get there is, I can recommend a book. This is a commentary of the Khairudin by a local Ustaz, Ustaz Anwar. So he translated this Qarida Bahiyah, which is a traditional work on Aqidah, which is the Aqidah of Al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, defined as the works of Imam Al-Ash'ari and Imam Maturidi. So this is where I'm going to connect what Hamka says to our Nusantaran intellectual tradition, where we have this Aqidah of Al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, which helps us have a concrete belief in Allah and allows us to have this rational spirit as well, because within it we learn the rational law. So we answer questions like but the modern university will sometimes, the snark students will sometimes pose a question: do you believe in Allah? If God can do anything, can He create another God? And then the beauty of understanding traditional works of Aqidah is these are texts that were written by the scholars to be memorized by children who are in life now by the age of 6. So 6 or 8. And what is the answer to that question earlier? In the rational laws, we understand that if something is created, then it will cease to be God. So the question itself is problematic because God cannot be created. So just tying in what Prof just went through in terms of, so Hamka here, he goes through just 3 levels of yaqeen, maybe for brevity. But in a traditional book, which is a book that many people study, there are 4. So that's this dialogue between me and Prof, just connecting what Hamka says here to what people online may be more familiar with, or if anyone wants to explore, you can check out the book, which is available at Wardah. So from here, Prof, so he has gone through the levels of yaqeen, and I found it interesting that the page right after the one that you read, here he says, if you guys can turn to the page after, iman itu masih bertelanjang, pakaiannya ialah takwa, perhiasannya ialah madu, hartanya ialah ifah, buahnya ialah ilmu. So after this page, he goes into a history of the world. So if you guys are not sure, he has written a book on the history of the Muslim people. So from here he goes way back into the medieval ages all the way to the present time. So we can recommend that as well. Here he goes into a discourse on the history of the world, and he says that segala agama yang diturunkan Allah sejak manusia cerdas. I want to ask Prof, what is the meaning of manusia cerdas? I think to the first insan.
Yes, correct. Yes.
So he acknowledges the cavemen and the Americans.
I think when he said manusia cerdas, that means when civilization now becomes developed.
So I wanted to, maybe I can just go back and forth, Prof. It's interesting here because these 8,000 years that he mentions is in line with another opinion by Professor Nakib Alatas, another giant of the Malay world, which I can recommend his works on. He wrote a book called On Justice and the Nature of Man, and he, through the genealogical sciences, he went through a calculation of the years back in which the prophets would have lived, and he places Nabi Adam around 8,000 years ago as well. So I just found it interesting, and then maybe from there you want to take it away, Prof, from the next part.
So the thing that Hamid was mentioning just now about doubt, I just want to go back to that point again. Firstly, we must know that doubt is not a bad thing, right? Doubt is not a bad thing. What is bad is absolute doubt. Absolute doubt means that you doubt everything. And this is the new movement that came about in the 1970s called postmodernism, post-structuralism, where nothing can be believed in. And in Islam, there is a science called Khairudin Aljunied, which means that it gives you the qaida, it's not principles, the rules of fiqh, right? It's actually the philosophy of fiqh, where in one of it, it states, al-yaqeen la yuzalu bishak. There is a qaida in usul fiqh called al-yaqeen la yuzalu bishak, which means that certainty cannot be negated by doubt. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that the starting point of all knowledge in Islam is that you must be certain. That's the first thing, right? You must be certain that what you are learning is something that is the truth. That's the first. But the principles also say, al-yaqin la yuzalu bi-shak. In that principle itself, it is also trying to say that even though you have acknowledged that it is the truth, dengan keyakinan, kita tahu benda tu benda yang benar, you must also question it in order for you to learn more and more and more. And this is something that we need to emphasize, because again, there are two poles in this. The people who are absolutely doubtful and the people who are absolutely subscribing to one truth. And that's why some people, they follow certain groups and then they say, oh, only their sheikh is right. Right? Only this group is right. Only that person's words are supposed to be accepted. Then it becomes a big problem. And that's why Imam Ghazali, in his Munkif min Dalal, the deliverance from error, which I encourage everybody to read, he says, make truth the judgment of man, not man the judgment of truth. The truth will always be above everybody else. The truth will always remain the truth. But human beings might not say the absolute truth. So do not subscribe to one person's truth and see it as the absolute truth. Learn from as many people as possible, but whoever that you are learning from, you must always question and question and question. And again, if you have a teacher that tells you jangan banyak soal, you ought to move on to another teacher. That's not the real teacher that you should be with. Because a good teacher will always allow you to question within limits and then try to resolve the question, the doubts that you have. An excellent teacher, much like Imam Malik, when many people came from many places to visit him and ask him questions, and there are questions that he cannot answer, he say, Ana la adri, I don't know. He will say, I don't know, and that person will direct you to another person who is an expert in that field. Now that leads me to another point. Why do people have doubt? Right? People have doubt for many reasons. One is that they have an inquisitive mind. Right? And young children have that. So I like to engage with young children because they will ask you the most strangest questions. Like you said just now, if God is so powerful, why don't He create another God? Right? But children will ask, if God is so powerful, why does He make people die in such a very tragic way in Gaza and all of these places? So how are you going to answer? Right? It is okay to question, but it becomes a problem when someone questions in connection to or driven by hawa nafsu. What is hawa nafsu? Inner desires. So Imam Ghazali also has a chapter in Ihya al-Muddin, and now it has been translated, breaking the two desires. So I want to recommend this book, everybody to read it. But Hamka says in the part on akal dan hawa, he says hawa nafsu lebih suka kepada perkara yang mulanya enak walaupun akibatnya kecelakaan. Tidak ubah dengan anak kecil. So again, he gives the example of a young child yang lebih suka memakan gula-gula walaupun dilarang. Padahal kalau terlalu banyak makan gula-gula dapat merosakkan kesihatannya. So he says that what we need to be careful of in exercising our akal is when akal follows our desires. And that's why, as I said just now, sometimes the most smartest of people do the most stupidest of things. Right? You see professors getting involved in relationships that are not professional, and do people who are smart doing the most craziest things. Why? Because they let their inner desires follow them. And the inner desires need not be the desire for another gender. It can be the desire for status. It can be the desire for property and money. It can be the desire for praise. Ada orang dia suka dipuji, so they do things because they want to be praised. Sometimes even of people who know religion, they act in a certain way, they behave in a certain way, they talk in a certain way, they propound themselves in a certain way, dress in a certain way, because they want people to say, oh, ni memang orang yang hebat. And these are people who follow the nafsu. And he goes on and on. He says that kalau terjadi pertandingan antara akal dan nafsu, kedua-duanya sama-sama ada pembantu. Akal dibantu oleh nur Allah, oleh hidayah Tuhan, dan nafsu dibantu oleh fitnah syaitan, oleh gelap iblis. So we must know that the smarter we become, the more we are cognizant of things, the more we understand things, the shaitan will send. If you are still learning, he will send his lieutenant, and if you are better and better, he will send his general. If you are really so good at the level of ulama, they will send you the minister, whatever, to try and lead you from the path. And this is why we need to know that when we feel that the hawa nafsu is taking over the akal, we then, as we have been taught by Rasulullah SAW, always do istighfar. That's why people of knowledge, every day, they must not fail to say Astaghfirullahalazim, Astaghfirullahalazim. And when you hear the whispers of shaitan telling you to do certain things that are bad, that are not good, and creating doubt in your heart, you just say A'udzubillah minasyaitonirrajim, and always do this daily. Because we, especially as we grow older, this is for the people who are older, my age now reaching the big 50 and others, lagi banyak bisikan-bisikan yang tak baik. Itu sebab kalau kita lihat masyarakat kita ni, masyarakat Muslim kita ni, whether in Singapore, in Malaysia, in many other parts of Southeast Asia, divorce is very, very high. Divorce is very, very high. Why is divorce so high in our society? Of course, the reason for it is material problems, misunderstanding and all. But what Hamka is saying here, it has to do with akal being taken over by nafsu. Most of the divorce cases, keretakan keluarga disebabkan dengan hawa nafsu. Banyak sangat berbelanja sampai tak boleh bayar, jadi isu. And sometimes man or woman, I have a friend who's married with a lot of kids, and then suddenly one day he found out that the wife has already got an affair with another man. And there are also stories about pakcik-pakcik going to Batam, Tanjung Pinang and others. All of these things are happening, and all of these things, do not think that this is the problem of the common people. Even the ustads, the professors, the whoever that is very learned, I have friends who are of that level, they also fall into it. So akal ini boleh diperbodohkan oleh nafsu. Akal can be made dumb, can be dumbed down by your desires.
Now, Prof, maybe if I can go in, just touch on the point about divorce and marriage as well. The place of the akal in the marriage is something that is not talked about enough. When we come across videos online, sorry, I'm very affected by the video sometimes. Because there's a fixation on sound bites. So the sound bites sometimes, there was the horrible one that I heard recently was kalau suami tanya solat dulu atau pergi ke suami dulu. And then
kalau suami tanya solat dulu atau pergi ke suami dulu.
Kalau tengah solat, habiskan solat dulu atau pergi ke suami dulu. And then the whoever was answering the question apparently was a learned person. He answered the question. But then the first question that should come to a husband who's doing his akal is, if your wife is praying, why are you not praying with your wife? So you don't even have to, instead of relegating your thought process or your intellect to whatever you think the hadith says, which might not even be what it said. The presence of love and the presence of rational thinking about what the other person is feeling, that might be a very strong cause of the emotional separation that occurs.
Right. So I think the issue is actually at two levels here. You're saying. Number one is the interpretation of sources, and this happens not only to ahli agamawan, but also to us as people who are studying other things. You see a source and you interpret the source without understanding the context, right? For example, there has been a lot of discussions on this. When Rasulullah made the statement that most women will go to hell. When you go to hell, you'll see more women. And a lot of men like to use this hadith against women. Say that, oh, don't behave like this because you will join the majority in hell. Right? And this has also been the cause of divorce actually. But this is an irrational understanding of the hadith. I'm not a muhaddithin, I'm not an expert in hadith, I'm an expert in history, and we deal with sources, just like a muhaddith deal with sources. When Rasulullah says something, he said within a context. Now, when we look at the life of Rasulullah as a whole, in his management of his wives, there is no one person in the history of Islam that exhibit the highest form of intellect in the management of his wife. I give you a simple example, and it is in the Quran. When you have time, read Surah At-Tahrim. Ya ayuhan nabiyyu la tuharrimu ma ahallallahu lak. It starts with the ayat where Allah tells Rasulullah SAW, do not make haram something that is halal. So what actually happened in that surah? What happened was, Rasulullah came back from one of his wives' home, and he ate honey, right? And then one of the other wives saw that he had eaten honey, and then make it an issue. And Rasulullah says, now I don't want to eat honey anymore. Right? So Allah sends an ayat to say, do not make something that is halal, haram. Now how did Rasulullah SAW react? I mean, imagine, we are Rasulullah, right? Like Rasulullah in his situation, not that we are Rasulullah. We are in Rasulullah's situation. You come back home, tired from work, and then your wife say, hey, how come you have something in your mouth? Did you eat somewhere? Yeah, I went somewhere to eat. It was nice food. It must be this woman, right, giving you the food. Why are you eating this woman's food? How would we react as a man? Huh? How do we do it? Usually, kau jangan merapik lah. We start an argument. But how did Rasulullah SAW do it? There was even a story where when Rasulullah had an argument with one of his wives, Aisha, if I'm not wrong, and Aisha actually not really beat, like, pounce his body. Like women are angry with you, and then she said, no, why did you do this? Because Aisha was very young. And then Abu Bakr came in and saw Aisha doing it. And he was telling Aisha, how dare you do this to Rasulullah SAW? And what did Rasulullah say? Perempuan semua masuk neraka. No. What did he say to Abu Bakr? He said to Abu Bakr, stop. This is not your issue. They have done more worse than this. Right? So what does it tell us? It tells us that when we are able, especially as men, to exercise akal in its fullest and matured form, and not follow our desires and our nafsul amara, and which is a big thing, the desire that will make us easily frustrated and get mad and get angry, we will know how to take care of our wife. That's why Rasulullah says, khairukum li ahlihi wa ana khairukum li ahli. The best amongst you are the one who is the best with your wife, and I, he says, are the best with my wife. Why is he the best with his wife? Because he uses his reason. In a state where there is confusion, where there is frustration, where there is anger, where there is misunderstanding, he'll be the first to use his reason first. And this is something that I think we need to kind of make it public, that there are so many of these discussions that you see online that is actually pulling us away from reason. They are actually making men especially irrational and asking from women irrational things, not treating women as not only equal, but to put them in a place that is noble, especially in the family. And this is actually a problem in our community. I'm telling you, the irrationality in Muslim families have gotten to the level where women are suffering the most. I was just writing about this 2 days ago, looking at the statistics of divorce in the Muslim world, all over the Muslim world. In Pakistan, in Indonesia, in others, more and more women are asking for divorce than men. Right? Why is this happening? For many reasons, but we can attribute it to men not doing their jobs and not, exercising a more informed way of reason. So that leads me to this other point that Hamka brought up, the issue of ignorance, kejahilan. And kejahilan is the first sickness that besiege the Muslims such that they become backward. So in the chapter on Jahil, it's interesting, he calls the whole chapter Jahil, right? And if you read it very carefully, he directed actually to men, this thing, right? He says there are two kinds of kejahilan, of ignorance, okay? The first kind of ignorance is what he called as Jahil Bathif. Okay, Jahil Bathif. And the second kind of ignorance is what has been called as Jahil Murakkab. Okay, let's go to it one by one. He says, Jahil Bathif atau jahil yang tipis ialah lantaran diingatkan kekurangan akal dan kekurangan pengalaman, dan yang bersangkutan insaf kejahilan. Jahil yang begini kalau terlanjur mengejarkan kesalahan, lalu diingatkan lekas berubah, masih batinnya kerana batinnya masih suci. Orang yang jahil batin ni, these people, they are people who are just ignorant. They just don't know, but they are humble. Dia tahu yang dia tak tahu. Walaupun dia banyak makan tahu goreng, yeah? He know the person who is ignorant and knows that he or she is ignorant. And why I say he's relating it to men, because during his time in Minangkabau society, a lot of men, because they are more ignorant than women, when they see something that is happening at home, for example, they see something that was never there at home, they straight away accuse their wives of doing something truant to them. Ni orang jahil yang batin. Dia tak tahu, tapi dia tahu dia tak tahu. Bila kita ingatkan dia cakap, betul juga awak cakap ni. Because the heart is humble, they can change. And these people can be taught. Some people are like this. But he says the more dangerous is the second type, which is called Jahil Murakkab. Murakkab means like compounded. Dia dah jahil, dia extra jahil from the jahil. So he says, these people, Jahil Murakkab ni, he says in the next page, adalah lantaran sombong. These are what we call in Malay, bodoh, sombong. Kadang-kadang dia jahat. Syed Hussein Alatas panggil jadung. Dia dah jahat, dia dah bodoh, dia dah lagi sombong. Dan orang sebegini, he says, these are the people who can be divided into 3 levels. So Hamka ni, he likes to talk 4 levels, sorry. He likes to talk about the different levels of people who are compounded ignorant. Right? He says the first level, he says, dia tidak mempunyai pendirian, baik pendirian yang benar atau salah sekalipun, masih kosong. So this kind of people who are ignorant but don't know that the person is ignorant, unlike Jahil Bathif, at least at the first level, right, he is still empty. That means his mind is not tainted by anything yet. He doesn't know that he doesn't know, but at least he is not affected by anything that is influencing him. This kind of people who are jahil, according to him, like Jahil Bathif, he can still be slowly changed if you keep on reminding them. And you see this in our community. Dia tak tahu yang dia tak tahu, tapi dia cakap macam dia tahu. Tapi kalau dia dengar orang cakap, kadang-kadang dia boleh terima apa orang cakap. Kadang-kadang suami kita pun macam gitu. Not my suami lah, your suami lah. He doesn't know that he doesn't know, but when you tell him, slowly, he will change. So it's a reminder for the ladies. If you want to win your husband's heart, it's not only through the stomach. It's through what? How do you want to win your husband's heart? Cakap baik-baik. Cakap baik-baik. If you want to get something from your husband, say it nicely. And that is the power of women. And someday I'm going to write a book about this. The title of the book is Gentleness.
I'll share a bit about women. One of the most
You share a bit about women, eh?
No.
Okay.
What the scholar said about women. One of the most beautiful lines that I've ever heard. It was by Ibn Arabi. He said one of the clearest manifestations of Allah's divine qualities on earth is found in the person of a woman. So in their gentleness, in their beauty.
Exactly.
It's found.
But what has happened to women? it has been destroyed by feminism, right? The femininity of woman has been taken away by feminism right now. Because feminism say there must be woman power. If there's Captain America, there is man. There's Captain America, there is woman. Right? Every single Marvel and DC movie, there will be a woman hero. Right? As if to say that women have not been heroes before, and now we need to reinstate it back. But at least in the history of Islam, and I just gave a lecture in Beijing last month, and they were all like 80% women in the room, and I was asking the Chinese students, who is the most powerful here in Chinese homes? Every single one say, what a mama. My mother say, why? But your president is a man, what? No. When you go home, the man cannot say anything. The woman is the one who decides on everything. So, but if you look at the Malay society, and if you study the structure of the Malay societies in the past, women always win because they are soft. Women always win because they get to the heart. Because the way to a man is to win his heart. So that's the first.
Prof, I can add just one good recommendation. This is on the power of women in the Malay world. There's this book by, what's Prof?
The Sultanas.
Yeah,
the Sultanas.
The Four Queens of Aceh.
Yes.
I believe. Nowhere else in the entire world will you find an entire kingdom run by women for 4 consecutive generations. And why did they fall? Because the West came and colonized us. Did they fall because of it? No, sorry. There was a fatwa that was passed by one of the scholars in the Caliphate, and then they were forced to bequeath their thrones. But yeah, you should definitely check that book out by the Prof.
Yeah, even in my book Islam in Malaysia, I also make this point. There's one chapter on women and other Islamizers, and I showed in the book that women played a big role in the spread of Islam in Southeast Asia. There were women admirals in the Achenese army. And why do the Achenese put women in those positions? Because women can negotiate better. If you send a man to the enemy and talk, there would be usually wars. But if you send a woman, and the woman is negotiating and all, so they make actually better diplomats. There's another good book by Barbara Andaya called The Flaming Womb. And she talks about the roles of women in Southeast Asia. And all of these works actually show that women in Southeast Asia have always maintained their femininity. And that's why if you look at, I don't know whether any one of you have been to Borobudur, even though it's not about Islam, if you look at all of the statues in Borobudur, there were some statues of women, the emphasis is always on how they look womanly. Not like you turn the woman into like a man, kind of. So that's the first, the level of Jahil Murakab, tingkat yang pertama. Tingkat yang kedua, he says, mempunyai pendirian yang salah tetapi tidak tahu kesalahannya. Dipegangnya kerana jahilnya, ini pun mudah berubah. So, he has a wrong perception, but he doesn't know the perception is wrong, but he holds on to it. So, if the first one, he doesn't know that he doesn't know, and then he tries to justify himself and know that he's wrong. The second one, he tries to justify himself. He still thinks, unlike the first one, that he is correct, defends it, but then realize actually this is not a defensible point. And you also meet these people. After you have argued with them 2-3 times, if they think and think and think, they realize that they actually do not know. And the same is it at the level of the family. Sometimes we must always keep on reminding and reminding and reminding. And that's why every Jum'ah, very interesting, we always read Surah Al-Ghashiyah. Dan Surah Al-Ghashiyah, I'm sure everybody knows, there is an ayat, 2 ayats in Surah Al-Ghashiyah that is so powerful that people don't take note of. فَذَكِّرْ إِنَّمَا أَنْتَ مُذَّكِّرْ لَسْتَ عَلَيْهِمْ بِمُسَيْطِرْ إِلَّا مَنْ تَوَلَّى وَكَفَرَ. The ayat is basically trying to tell us, actually talking about Rasulullah SAW, and give reminder. For you are only someone who gives reminders. And no one has the power to change anything save Allah Himself. Only Allah can change people's hearts. But all we need to do is always remind, and again and again. And people who are at the second level, the more we remind, the more Hamka says, he is like a rock, batu tulis yang telah dicoreng. That means if you keep on cleaning it up, writing on it again, the person will pick up the new idea that you give them. And